In this quick video tutorial, I'm going to go over how we can make our own custom multi-switch or branch-like node in the Material Editor in Unreal Engine 5.2. This will allow us to have controls that can not only toggle to be true or false, but to have as many possible switches or selection amounts as we could want. So I have this road here, and I'll be able to change the road rules that get painted on it by changing this pick value. So if it's 0, it's concrete. If it's 1, 2, 3, 4, I can have it endlessly change to as many variations as I want with this one control. So we'll look at how we can do that with our materials. To begin, I start with an empty scene, and I'm just going to create a brand new material here and call it m_road. And I have two textures here that will also be available for the Patreons. One of just a concrete road texture, so it's just some concrete, and then also a texture that's a packed map. And when I say packed, that means the map contains multiple color channels, red, green, and blue, like most color images, but in each channel it stores different information. So the red channel stores a mask of this kind of outline of this road painting for like maybe a four-way intersection, and then the green channel stores this X, and then the blue channel stores this double lined pattern. And by turning on and off channels, you can combine these. So I could have red and green and get the outer edge plus the green line, or I could just do green and blue and get these two to be combined. So when I say packed map, I'm packing different information into each red, green, and blue channel to cut down on the amount of textures that I would have to load in to Unreal. So it keeps things more condensed and it keeps things more optimized. Now there's a bunch of ways you can add these onto your ground texture. You could use decals, you could use all kinds of approaches, but in this case, I'm going to approach a situation where we have our material. So I'm just going to open up this empty material here, and we'll drag in our concrete texture. So I'm going to go here and just quickly drop in our concrete, drop in our packed masks. And if I connect up the concrete and I want to apply these masks on top, I can do that with a lerp or a blend by masking a color and adding it on top of this texture based on this mask. So if I do that, I can do a lerp or linear interpolate, and I can do one value over another. So I'll create a color. So I'm going to create a constant 3 vector just to define a color, and I'll just do some sort of gray tone, and that will be my B value. The A value will be the concrete, and my alpha will be maybe just the red channel of this mask. And then if I use that as my base color, okay, now we get that pattern added on top because it's taking this color and putting it on top of this texture based on this mask. Now the only problem is if I want to toggle between different painting on this road or different road rules. So if I want to modify which one of these channels that we'll use based on some sort of control, there's a bunch of things we could use to do that. There's a static Boolean parameter which only allows you to set true or false. So that'll only give us two possible values or two possible outputs, which is not ideal. We could use a mask component, which will give us red, green, and blue options, or alpha as well. But that still is limited by 4 slots. So one thing we could do is either write our own node to handle this, or there's also a switch node. And a switch node will allow us to specify a value, and then based on that value, use one of these outputs. And by default, it's 0. So I can go in here and set this to have 3 outputs. So red, green, blue, and maybe a combination of the two. So maybe I can take green and blue and add them together and make like a new combination of those two. And then the switch values will switch between what I'm outputting. So if it's 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see the image is changing here. So that's one thing you can use, which is super useful. Now, if you have to do something a bit more complex or you want a bit more control over it, you can also make your own nodes that do this very simply. And we're going to take a look at this with HLSL or a custom node. So we can also create a custom node and we can add some code in here and pretty much replicate that very same control, but have a little bit more flexibility over what happens. We can also make it so that you can invert things or that it can combine different textures together in another way. You'll have more control over it, but more so, this might get you a bit interested in HLSL or using the custom nodes in Unreal. So after we've created our custom node, we're going to add multiple inputs. So there's inputs here and the default input is set to none. We're just going to call that as our pick value. So the output that we're wanting to choose. And then we're going to add 3 more and we're going to call it in 1, in 2, and in 3. And we'll connect those up to our red, green, and blue channels here. And then our pick amount will be the value that you're choosing that you want to output. So we'll create our own constant as a control, and we'll make that a parameter and call it pick. And by default, we'll have it at 0. And now we'll connect this to our alpha. So our alpha will pretty much take whatever this node outputs. And we're going to make this node output either 1, 2, or 3 based on this value. And to do that, we'll edit the code here. And to do the code for this is going to be very simple. I'm just going to open up Visual Studio Code to make it a little bit easier to take a look at the code. So here we go. And the code that we're going to do is we first have to define our result. So I'm going to make a variable called result, and I'm making it a float. So it can only store black and white values, which works fine for now. It only can store grayscale values. If I want it to be able to store color, I have to make it a float 3. A float with 3 separate values, one for red, green, and blue. If I want it to store red, green, and blue in alpha, then it has to be a float 4. But for this case, since it's a mask, a grayscale value will work fine. So I'll make this variable called result, and it will equal our pick value. So we already have that variable or that input called pick. So we'll check if pick equals 1, and then we put a question mark, and that makes this like a checking conditional statement. And this is a very short and condensed way to do a if-else statement in HLSL. We can do this. If pick equals 1, then what we'll do is use in 1. Otherwise, or else, we'll return black, so no values. Now, if we want to extend this to have more, we can pretty much just copy this down. So we could do pick 1, 2, 3, and do something like this. And I'll just format this nicely. If it's pick 2, use in 2. If it's pick 3, use in 3. Else, return 0, or no value in our mask. And then we'll return this full result, return result, and that's it. And if I use this code inside our custom node here, and we give this a try, let's see if we get any errors. Oh, I got an error because I put, look at that, I forgot to add the float 3. So when we go back to this code here, I can't say a float and then give it 3 values. I have to do float 3 individual values. So once I've corrected that error, now we have our material. And if we change this pick value to 1, 2, 3, it changes the pattern. And since this pick value is set as a parameter, if I were to save this material and then instance it and open it up, we will end up with a material that has a control called pick that can easily be changed and toggle in different outputs. And again, you can do this exact same thing with a switch node in Unreal. That is also very useful, but we pretty much just recreated it in HLSL. And if that interests you, making custom nodes and being able to have full control over what you do, take a look at the other videos that I have on HLSL coding in Unreal. If you've enjoyed this video or you learned something new, make sure to like, subscribe, press the bell notification to be notified of future videos, and if you're part of the Patreon, which is in the description down below, you'll also get access to the PDF for this video as well.